welcome to the to Amer's podcast. My name is Amer, and today with me is Jan Bosch. Jan, how are you?
I'm doing fabulously well. I'm living the dream.
How's Sweden this time of year?
Actually, today it's sunny. Would you believe
Ah,
it? Which
uh,
is
uh,
not very common in Gothenburg. I mean, we get a lot of from the Atlantic Ocean in terms of gifts, but today it's sunny. And after this,
yeah,
I'm going to go out for a walk. So,
you're very in the right there. I mean, the Netherlands, as you know, is clouded and rainy. So,
I'm not surprised. Color me surprised, as the saying goes.
yeah,
No.
yeah, yeah. Could you let's start off with just the beginning. Could you tell a little bit about your background so people know who you are?
Sure. So my background is originally in academia. I had professorships in Sweden. This is actually the second time I live in Sweden. And in the Netherlands, in the lovely city of Groningen. For all your Dutch listeners, they know exactly where it is. My dad used to say that the theory that the earth is flat originated from Groningen. I'm not sure if that's true, but I mean, at least I thought it was actually kind of funny. And then in the early 2000s, I got the offer to join Nokia.
Mm,
So what happened was that I got the opportunity to run one of the research labs at Nokia Research Center, the Software and Application Technologies Lab. I did that for a number of years. And then I got the opportunity to move to Silicon Valley. Moved to basically, we lived in Los Altos Hills, but I worked in Mountain View for a company called Intuit, which
mm.
most Europeans don't know, but if you've lived in the US, you probably know TurboTax and
It's pretty
QuickBooks and
big.
a whole bunch of other companies. It's a quite sizable company, and I worked there in VP level positions. And after that, I decided to go back to Europe, go back to academia. And these days, I work at Chalmers University of Technology in Gothenburg, Sweden.
Mm.
I also run a research center with 15 companies and 5 universities, all around accelerating digitalization or the digital transformation of those companies, which is concerned with software, data, and artificial intelligence. Next to that, I run a small consultancy, and since I never say no to money, if any of you want to hire me, please go ahead. I work as an angel investor in a number of startups, and I do support work.
Nice. Well, that's a bunch of things, and I think that's a good introduction to yourself. I was wondering because you started in academia, then went into just the business world and doing
Mhm.
particular things, and going back. What made you want to pursue that transition back again? I'm wondering about that.
Yeah. Um, I have a problem. And that problem is that when I run into specific and concrete situations in industry, I always was trying to understand what in heaven's name was going on.
Mm,
And academia allows me to basically identify, structure, reflect on, and come up with models and frameworks to explain what is actually happening in industry. So that is one of the big things that for me is quite important.
mm,
The second big thing why I wanted to move back to Europe and become the director of this software center that we're talking about is that I saw Nokia, the company that I used to work for, go through a kind of significant transition while I was in Silicon Valley. Yeah, Nokia basically went from being the top dog in the European in the mobile phone industry. We shipped 400 million phones in the year that I left,
mm.
to basically becoming the poodle in the corner that everyone likes to kick.
Yeah.
Now, I personally hate poodles. I personally think that poodles deserve to be kicked, which is undoubtedly causing some issues among your readership. But
I think people are very graphic. Yes, I think.
yes, but the point is that you don't want your company to become the poodle of the industry. And if I
Mm,
now look at the European software-intensive systems industry, we are at severe risk. And I know you work for AWS, but between American companies that are very active in innovating and Asian companies that have an enormous cost advantage, I believe that Europe is in a very difficult place. And
mm.
what I'm trying to do with the companies that are in my center is to help them change faster than what they would do without my help. Because I believe that that's the only answer European companies have in order to survive or preferably even thrive in the digital transformation that we're currently going through.
Yeah. So I think it's good to expand on that a little bit because I see this quite a well. The memes are around, right, with Europe and innovation and those kind of
Yes.
things. It's kind of a uh, it it's not really Europe is not really viewed as kind of a hotbed for new kind of technologies and startups and those kind
Yeah.
of things. There's a bunch of things going on, but it's not you don't see as many scaled kind of unicorns or whatever you want to call them yeah,
Yes,
as you
especially
have in the
scale
US.
ups and the companies that become of significant size in the.
Yeah, yeah, and usually people will say that it's because of legislation and rules and those kind of things. How do you see that? Because I can imagine that's not the it's not different for the companies that you help.
Yeah. I think there are at least three elements. I mean, the first is we have an enormous regulatory pressure in the European Union. I don't
Mm,
know how much you are exposed to it, but one of the companies that I work with in the automotive industry claims that they have to comply with anything between 250 and 300 different regulations, acts, and laws in order to be able to operate. Yeah,
mm,
and this is only getting worse. We have the Data Act, the AI Act, the Cyber Resilience Act, the Product Sustainability Act, the Product Liability Act, and it just keeps going. So that makes it very, very difficult to uh, drive any type of innovation without breaking some law, act, or regulation anywhere.
yeah,
That, I believe, has resulted in a culture in Europe which is extremely risk avoidant.
mm,
Yeah, so what I see is that many of the people that I at least run into, and I actively try to support startups, they are really careful. They don't dare to take the risk. And then the
mm,
third is once there are people that go the journey and they do build companies, very rapidly they become American owned. Yeah, I
mm,
mean, I think you all know Booking.com in the Netherlands. When they ran into a little bit of a hiccup in the early 2000s, they basically Priceline jumped in, bought them, and now Booking is an American company.
mm,
Yeah, I am involved as an investor in a company that was Norwegian and raised money from a US VC. And the next thing that happens is that it's now a Delaware-based company, and the CEO lives in Silicon Valley. So what I see is that even the most interesting and promising innovations and startups that we have very rapidly become American instead. So those are three reasons that I think are
mm,
causing us to have a problem. And I mean, you've seen the Draghi report, and there's all kinds of other things that people want to do about it. But I think the problems are quite systemic and quite fundamental, and it's going to be a slog and an uphill battle to break out of that, I believe.
mm. And is the well, is the solution, well, it's probably partly the solution, but is it to kind of bring down the legislation, or is it more in terms of like funding and those kind I think the funding should probably be all right. It's just where you run into is what you said, like you have like 200 rules or 200 laws that you need to abide by,
Yeah.
right? So what
So,
do you see there?
so luckily over the last 10, 15 years that I've been back in Europe, especially scale up funding has become better. There was always funding for early stage startups,
Sure.
but it's especially funding the scale ups. I mean, if we now
Mm,
look at the amount of money that an OpenAI knows how to raise, basically, I'm not sure if you looked at those numbers.
yeah.
I mean, those are pretty ridiculous numbers that I don't see any European company manage to do by itself. So I think that the scale-up funding it has been getting better, but it's still a bit of a challenge. So I think that that's one of the challenges. Um, but other than that, I am actually I think that that's one of the key challenges. The other one is pure risk avoidance. I mean, everyone in Europe is basically concerned with, yesterday was pretty good. Today's not too bad. If we just make sure that tomorrow looks like yesterday and today, then we're pretty good well off. I mean, in
Yeah.
some way, I have the feeling that Europe has become very complacent in many ways. So there is a deep cultural a lack of there's a deep culture of lack of belief that the life can become significantly better.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I think that we might, well, we as you said, we tend to look at the legislation and say like, okay, that's the issue, and but it's also the spirit of entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah.
Just how uh, like really thinking big in terms of like, okay, what can we achieve here?
Yes.
And usually what you also see is that well, it makes sense if you look at the market in, for example, the United States. It's one, well, there's states of course, but it's one market, right? It's so if you have like a startup that does well, you can scale up quite easily.
Yeah.
And in Europe you can run into like different countries have different rules and those kind of things. So there's also that kind of aspect,
Yes.
I think, that that hurts companies.
And it doesn't that it doesn't happen. I mean, here in Sweden we have Spotify,
Sure.
of course. We have Klarna. We have several other companies that have done quite well. I mean, King.com is of course owned by Microsoft these days, but it was a Swedish startup. So Candy Crush and those
Yeah.
kind of games come from here. So I don't think Sweden is doing particularly bad. But yeah, when things are very successful, they tend to become either American or they. But I mean, sorry, the point I was trying to make is each of these companies had to conquer one country at a time here in Europe.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yes, yes, yeah, yeah. Well, that's what you see. It's like a company. It could be anywhere, right? They can start in any of the countries here, but uh, as whenever you, let's say, expand from like the Netherlands to Germany or something like that,
Yeah.
like that's a huge step for any
Yes.
company. They need a lot of funding. They need a lot of marketing, etc., etc. There's a bunch of things that need to be done. It's also language barriers, of course, like it's different languages. So there's a bunch of things that make it more complex than
Yeah.
it is in the United States, for example. um, so what I wanted to ask you about, because that software center that you were talking about, what's kind of the things you help these companies with then? Is that more from a technological side, or is it more from like a side on how to deal with these kind of steps of expanding and those kind of things?
Yeah. So when we started in 2011, these
Hmm.
companies were very much concerned with how do we adopt modern practices to software development.
Okay.
So then it was agile practices, it was continuous integration and test, it was architecture, technical debt management, those kind of more technical topics. But what I realized is that what we need to do is we need to follow where the companies have their needs. So what we've done is we have expanded into topics such as data and how do we deal with data, data pipelines, data platforms, experimental approaches to development like A/B testing and those kind of approaches. And of course, over time, AI became a big part of that. Initially, it actually was a lot around traditional machine learning or deep learning, if you want. Then we started to look a lot into federated learning and reinforcement learning, which is, I think, quite important for Europe because we have a lot of systems that have mechanical and electronics and software components and AI components, and these often live on the edge. And if you have hundreds of thousands of trucks or cars or base stations or security cameras or what have you in the world, you can actually start to use the fact that all these devices are out there in order to collectively collect intelligence from a swarm or a fleet of products, if you want. So that's what we then looked at. Of course, 2025 is the year of agentic AI. I don't think you're very much surprised about that. I heard this
No.
morning from someone that I talked to that, it will probably not go so fast. It will probably be 26, but at least that's a big topic.
Mm.
But then on top of that, it's also innovation. How do you drive innovation processes, and especially large companies? How do we think about business models? I mean, for me, digitalization is not a technical problem, but it's actually a transition in how you deliver value to customers. Yeah,
Yeah.
from I buy a car and 5 years from now I buy the next car. I buy a car and you better make sure that that car gets better every day I use it by new software updates, new machine learning models, I don't know, periodic electronics upgrades, etc., etc. I want my car to behave like my phone or my computer. I want it to get better every day I use it. And it's not impossible. Eh? I mean, if a company like Ericsson
Mm.
has for the last, I think it's now 5 or 6 years already, basically offers new software to live base stations that have 5.9 or 6.9 uptime requirements every 2 to 4 weeks. Depending on the product, it's a 2 week cycle or a 4 week cycle. And any customer that says, okay, I want that, they're basically going to get the latest version of the software from a company
Mm,
like Ericsson. So, I mean, it's not like it isn't happening, but that then requires also your business model. If you
yeah.
deliver new value every 2 to 4 weeks, that comes with a cost. You have an R&D cost, a quality assurance cost, etc. And then you have to find ways in which you can also make money from that. And what we see is that many embedded systems companies are struggling with, I want to make money when I sell the physical product to the customer, and then I want to make money throughout the economic life of that physical product as well. That's what I see
Yeah.
many companies struggle with. You're starting to
Yeah.
look bored, Amer, so I have
No,
to be
no, no.
careful.
No, I'm not. I'm actually thinking about what you're saying, and that's true because when you see, for example, what you mentioned with Ericsson and stuff, um, it was very normal for these kind of companies to go for like 6 months or a year
Yeah.
without even updating anything on the
Yes.
device, right? When they deploy a device, it's done. We just keep it running, and whatever happens, happens, right? It was
Yeah.
kind of that kind of, and now what you see is that they need to switch thinking about like, okay, how do I keep giving value, as you said, but
Hmm.
then give like whatever kind of way a model to be able to keep sustaining this update cycle, right? Because
Yes.
it's a and it's a huge shift actually when you think about it for those kind of companies because they are like yeah, we create the device, we give it this software, and we deploy it. That's it. That's how they've always worked.
Yeah.
And now they need to think about, okay, when it's now deployed in the field, how do we do the connectivity, right, to do the updates and those kind of things? It's not just not just about having the updates, but it's also getting them there, right? And that's another complex step after that, I think.
Yeah. And two things to add to that. The first is connectivity is nice so you can deploy new software, but you also want to get data back from your product in the field
Oh
because what
yeah,
you're looking for
sure.
is the fast feedback loop. So you know that what you're building and deploying is actually delivering value to customers.
Mm,
And that then changes the entire systems engineering cycle because traditional systems engineers focusing on mechanics and electronics, they care about one thing and one thing only, and that is bill of materials. So
yeah.
they squeeze everything to the smallest space possible, which means that there is no headroom in the system to deploy new functionality throughout the life of the product. So you end up with basically a frozen product, not because you don't have new software features or functionality to deploy, but because it doesn't fit. Yeah,
Yes.
and that's I think, and then you see everything starting to change in a company because quality assurance or regulatory compliance was always used to work in a kind of waterfall fashion, and now
Yes.
suddenly you
Exactly.
have to do things every 2 weeks because if you update the software, you still need to verify that the system as a whole still works. Yeah, that's
Mm,
those are so the changes are big, but what's the alternative out?
yeah.
Not doing
Uh,
it is basically,
it's
will the
worse.
last employee please turn off the lights? Is basically because it's a guarantee of being disrupted, right?
Yeah, yeah, of course. I mean, that's what you see. I think you see the as you mentioned in the automotive industry as well, right?
Hmm.
Where now it's becoming more normal to have like updates to your software and stuff like that in your car,
Yeah.
where previously like updates, nobody does any updates, right? I think the best example of that is, for example, like sat nav or navigation
Hmm.
systems, right, in your car. Like if you had like maps change all the time, right? So there were little to no updates
Yeah.
back in the days a few years ago. Now it's getting there where
Yeah.
it's just updated over the air. Uh,
And of course, then we have, okay, don't get me started on regulation because then you have ISO 26262 and automotive
yes.
companies that don't know how to do DevOps and in such a context and all this other good stuff. But yes, I believe that any self-respecting automotive company that wants to stay in business in the future will have to be able to offer that because no customer is going to accept a car that just gets worse every day I use it. I wanted to,
Yeah.
I mean, if you talk to Tesla owners, I mean, I saw, especially in the beginning, lots of those videos where people just loved the fact that their car was getting better every couple of months or every couple of weeks or
Yeah,
something
new
like that.
features, right?
Yeah,
It's like with phones as well,
yeah,
where now, well, there were some issues with that as well when you think about it, where sometimes after like 2 or 3 years, you're not getting any updates anymore, right?
yeah,
So there is a bit of a trade-off there where you also need to well, a car has usually a longer lifespan than a phone, right?
Yeah.
And so there's also that kind of thing to it. Um, I wondered because you mentioned the whole agentic AI thing.
Hmm.
We touched on the big AI word. Um,
Sorry, I should have stayed away
and
from it.
no, no, no. Actually, it was one of the things I wanted to talk to you about anyway. I think um, what do you what do you see changing? Because we've had this whole Gen AI craze and a little bit of hype behind it
Hmm.
about things changing and stuff like that. And now we're saying like, okay, there's now agents that can do things for you,
Yeah,
basically. So how do you see that affecting things like software development, but maybe even like building companies and those kind of things? Like,
yeah.
how do you see that changing?
Where do I start? I
It's
think
a big
that
topic. Yeah.
I think that well, let me start at the bottom end. What I now see is that lots of software engineers or other roles within software development, anything from quality assurance to documentation to requirements management, product management, the whole shebang. Everyone is looking at their job thinking, my job consists of 20 tasks. 5 of those tasks I could either automate or significantly support with my with artificial intelligence or some kind of agent that can do things for me. And I think that that's a great start, and we should really embrace the let a thousand flowers bloom situation. But I also think that if we stop there, we're basically screwed. Pardon my French. There is a beautiful little video on the internet. People can look it up. It's Pekka Abramson from Tampere University, who basically has built a set of agents where every agent plays the role in a typical software development process. And
Mm,
the only thing the user does is provide the prompt. In this case, it's build me a snake game in Python. And then the agents do the entire process of creating the requirements, doing QA on the requirements, generating the design, doing QA on the design, generating the code, doing QA on the code, generating the test cases, running all the test cases. Out comes Python code, and you can copy paste that Python code into a Python environment, and basically it runs a snake game.
mm,
So the human didn't do anything. If you ask me what is going to happen is that in the long run, people building software systems will provide a prompt to I think, set of agents that are going to go and converse with each other and with you as whoever is providing this in order to what we refer to as grow systems instead of build them.
mm.
That's where I think things are going. And the other thing which I think is important in this context is okay, Sam Altman from OpenAI. He basically
Sure.
claims that there are gonna be single person unicorn companies, which is
Mm,
one human with a host of AI agents that are going to create so much value together that the company will be valued at $1 billion.
mm,
And this is where I see the big limitation. I'm actually in the midst of an interview study where I'm trying to find out from people in companies how they're actually using AI. Everyone is using it in a kind of bottom-up fashion. And what I believe we need in every discipline and in every company is that we reinvent how we work in this company top down. Because if you look at it, I mean, you have a software background, I think. If you look at software
infrastructure, yes.
architecture,
Yeah.
why do we have a software architecture? Because humans have limited information processing capabilities.
Mm,
And we need an architecture to help people understand that if they work in one part of the system, they need to understand how they interface to the rest of the system. However, AI agents do not have those constraints.
mm,
They do not have the same information processing constraints as humans, and hence they do not need the same scaffolding that humans need in order to be able to be productive. If you look at
mm.
human processes in companies, why do you have processes in companies? Because no single human can own the entire process top to bottom. Yeah,
Yeah,
because a
yeah.
human has limited information processing capabilities. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we need to do, if we really want to be radical about this, another word that we maybe should be talking about, if we want to be radical about it instead of evolutionary, we have to start from the top, go back to basic principles, and then redesign the value delivery process of the company around the capabilities of AI agents, and then figure out what are the things that agents or cannot do. That's where we insert humans. Yeah, those are humans that live below the interface. And then on
Mm.
top of that, we have a group of humans that are going to be basically controlling the system that controls the value delivery process, and will come up with improvements and experiments and different kinds of ways to try to figure out how to make things better. That's where I think life is going.
Mm.
But what I currently see is that it's bottom-up innovation. And there, where we try to get an agent in place that is really doing something important, we tend to create a standalone deployment that is not integrated into the existing infrastructure in the company. And we interact with that standalone deployment through RAG, prompts, and all kinds of other things in order to get answers out of it. Sorry for the
Yeah.
long tangent,
No, no,
but I'm
it's
really concerned about the fact that we are not spending enough time actually top down reinventing how companies should operate now that we have these new capabilities available.
yeah, I see that because what I see is that what you mentioned is actually the one thing that people now like usually what happens is when a founder starts a company, they know something very well, right? They
Yeah,
have like a specific specialty, or they know,
yeah,
as you said, like software engineering, or they know how to market well, or it could be anything, right? They have a specialty, otherwise they wouldn't start something. Um, but what you're saying now is that it basically happens that uh, that person gets like supercharged, that they can do other things that they might not have been able to do before. Like
yes,
they can actually, let's say I'm not a software developer, right? If I want to build an application nowadays, it's actually pretty feasible to do that
yeah. I mean, tools
without
like Cursor and others will basically allow you to create
whatever.
stuff very,
Yeah.
very easily. Yes.
Yeah, it could be anything. Yeah, and I think that's super interesting where you now open up the possibilities for other people that might have a very good idea, but they don't have the actual skills to do it, right? They cannot build it, and it would be cool when if you could like explain that idea to whatever, like let's say you just write a prompt somewhere,
Yeah,
and there the process kicks off, and while the process is going, you get like feedback loops, like just
exactly.
oh, we're thinking about this particular thing in this particular manner. I'm
Yeah,
saying we, but it's like the agents,
yeah.
let's call them like that. Is this what you're thinking about? Like, is this the thing that you want to have? That's kind of the thing.
Well, do I want to have it? I think that that's where the best use of AI is going to be.
Yes.
I think it will be, someone called it human in the loop AI. Yeah, you
Hmm.
need to basically, I mean, you've probably played around with the new models that actually have reasoning in
Sure.
them. And
Yeah.
then once you can read the reasoning, you can start to comment on the reasoning and explain to the model where it's making mistakes or where you were thinking differently. And then
Mm.
you get to growing solutions rather than building solutions. I think that that's one of the important things, that as humans, with these tools at our fingertips, I always talk about 10xing our output. This morning I was talking to someone who does a lot of work in AI, and he basically claims that he's now 100xing his output. I mean, by using these tools. Yeah, and that then brings us to a lot of repetitive work that
Mm.
maybe was considered to be blue collar, but not very exciting, maybe can be done in a different way so that we don't need 100 Amers, we only need one Amer, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Of course, people then gonna worry like, what am I going to do later, right?
Yeah,
That's kind of the next kind of question. Like, if you're now a software engineer, what's your role
yeah,
going to be in a few years, right? But I do see that as I mean, I talked about this actually in the last episode as well. But what you see is maybe the code gets generated and those kind of things. It's still valuable to have a human that understands
yeah,
what's going on, right? It's not like the AI can just do everything and we'll be fine. Like that's just not how it works, I think. So I think there's still, as you said, like a role for the human there to be there in the process when there is specific things that only a human can do,
Yeah.
right? So uh, is it kind of a doomsday kind of thing? I don't think so, but it is something to think about like what's going to change in the next few years. I'm very curious about that, just to kind of understand, like, okay, these are the things that are really going to be changing in these kind of professions. That's what I see.
So I'm super interested in that as well. That's why we're running this interview study, because I'm trying to figure out where is the world going. If some of your listeners or people that watch this video
Mm.
have strong views on how this will play out, I'd love to talk to them, because I'm looking for people that actually are doing this right now, or are trying to do this right now.
I'm happy to help out, by the way,
Good,
if that
because
helps.
I'm looking for people there. The thing that many people are extremely worried about employment and what will this mean for all the humans on the planet that basically get disrupted, etc., etc.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, from the spinning machine or the weaving machines that the Luddites were breaking in the 1700s. You probably remember the Luddites and the first weaving machines, and
Yes.
how people were thinking that that was going to disrupt the cottage industry of cloth and fabric creation. People were then extremely worried about employment and value creation and all this other good
Mm.
stuff. And every major transition since then has led to a situation that, of course, people were no longer doing the old jobs, but we found new jobs to actually create this. Yeah, I mean, one of my
Mm.
favorite examples is ATMs, where you can take out money. It turns out that for a long time after the introduction of the ATM, the number of bank tellers, which is humans sitting behind the counter in the bank, was actually going up. Yeah, for whatever
Mm.
reason, people just didn't need those people to get their money, but they still had all kinds of other questions. So, and we will find, I believe, new roles, new jobs, and new positions for people. And let's be frank, I mean, many of the things that are now easy or relatively easy to automate, they tend to be rather repetitive in nature.
Mm.
And to be
And
honest,
boring.
are they? Yes, exactly. I
Yeah.
mean, like now with truck drivers, right? I mean, no,
Mm.
we don't have autonomous, and I don't want to pick on truck drivers. Um, and we're not quite there yet with autonomous drive. But would you want to sit on a chair, look out of a window, and drive a truck for 10 hours a day, every day?
I wouldn't, but there are people that like this.
Well, then we can find other boring jobs or repetitive jobs for them. I shouldn't say boring. Probably they find this exciting. But
Yeah,
I
they
mean,
do.
I think that many people just are in a situation that they have extremely repetitive jobs, and they've been
True.
forced into accepting the realities of how they're spending their time and on this planet. And I just think
Mm.
that they would be much better off doing things that we as humans are uniquely good at. That's
Yeah,
at least what I
true.
believe.
True. No, I think so too. I mean, so yeah, if you think about things like documentation of code and those kind of things, like I've seen a lot of projects in my day, just things that are people are working on and stuff like that. That's one of those things that where whenever you ask, like, is there any documentation on this?
Yeah.
Almost never are you gonna hear, yes, there is, and it's like everything's very
And it's
extensive and stuff.
pristine and it's beautiful, and you know
Never.
exactly where to
Like,
find it, and it's well
yeah,
structured, and
yes,
I understand it's
yes.
trade-off. No, that's not how it works.
No, it doesn't work that way, and also it's kind of a waste actually to
Yeah.
have like good engineers write these kind of things. Although in the long run, it's a good decision, but it's just in that moment in time, like you want them to be productive in writing code and writing the application, not writing documentation. But yeah, it's if you can automate those kind of things, I don't think anybody would be against that.
No.
That's for sure. Yeah, I think it's fascinating. I think it's fascinating to see what will happen there. I I think it's all very it goes by very fast. All the kind of new transitions and stuff, but I don't think it's as fast as sometimes people are saying. Like 2025, 2026. I think there's going to be a bunch of things that are going to change, but I don't know if we're going to get to a point where the one man unicorn company or one woman unicorn company. I don't know if that's gonna happen already, but there's a possibility for it. I think there's a few good kind of products that are coming out where people are creating apps by just prompting and those kind
Yeah.
of things. Like it's gonna change a bunch of stuff. It's gonna make it more open for people to actually do these kind of things.
And I think you're putting your finger on something very important. I know that you work for Amazon, but I and many with me are extremely concerned about the concentration of new tech at a very small number of companies,
Mm.
which is one of the reasons why I was so incredibly happy when DeepSeek came out, because
Oh
that
yeah,
actually
sure.
was one of the first examples that basically showed that you could get, and I know there's lots of comments around this, but much cheaper hardware, smaller models, and still very, very good performance. Because what we see is that as society, we get real value from technology when it is highly democratized,
Exactly. Yes.
when it is available to everyone in high quality and low cost. That's when
Mm.
we see the innovations, not when seven companies on the planet are sitting on
No.
everything.
I don't, and I don't think that's just from my personal kind of view. I don't think that's healthy either.
No.
I think the if you look back at like the big kind of shifts in technology and software languages and stuff like that,
Yeah.
it usually happened because things are open,
Yeah.
like because they're open source and people can use it in their kind of capacity and stuff like that. So yeah, DeepSeek is an interesting one because it's disrupting something, right? It's disrupting like this is the way it was going, and now someone comes along and says like, hey, but actually we could do it this way,
Yes.
and it has a lot of benefits to doing it that way.
I think so, but there are lots of people criticizing it and claiming that the only reason that DeepSeek can exist is because OpenAI had its models.
Sure, yeah,
I'm not going to go there, but the fact is that in the end, I view technology as a fundamental force for good for humanity. I mean, there are
sure,
ways in which we can abuse technology. I mean, there are certain countries in the world that use face recognition to discriminate against certain
yeah, exactly,
minorities, and there are all kinds of other things. But by and large, people use technology for good. And what I
yeah,
believe is that we want to deploy technology faster rather than slower, and we want to make it broadly available to as many people as possible. That's when we reap the real benefits of technology as and the potential of technology. That's where I'm coming from. But I just finished a blog post series on techno optimism, so I am actually really concerned about the European anti-technology thing. The technology is going to take my job and make everything worse kind of attitude that I'm seeing. And
yeah.
I believe that people are underestimating how much value technology has brought to humankind.
Yeah, I think so too. I agree with you on that one. Jan, I think we can go for hours on this particular topic. One actually, before we close off, and I think the message that you had was a very good one to kind of close it off with. The last question I always ask to people
Hmm.
is, who would you like to see next on the podcast?
Yeah, now, I'm going to be a little biased here, but I work with a professor at another university here in Sweden called Helena Holmström Olsen.
Okay.
She is a professor of computer science. She has I think, different perspective on some of the questions that we have been discussing. So I think it would be a nice alternative view on this. But I
Mm.
think that you would enjoy talking to her and picking her brain on some of these questions. And if you're open to it, I happily introduce the two of you so you can have a chat with her and see if she's willing to take this forward. And the other thing is, you know, I don't want to play the gender card and everything, but let's face it, in many countries, Sweden is doing a little better than many Germanic countries. But I mean, computer science and tech is often still very male dominated. And I
Unfortunately, yes.
don't know how many women you've had on your podcast, but I think it would be good to get some female perspectives on this as well.
Yeah, that's well, I say that's unfortunately so,
Yeah.
and it is one of the reasons why I want to have more female guests.
Mm.
I've had a few on my previous podcast, quite a few actually, but yeah, I think I would be glad to talk to her
Good.
about these kind of things. So we'll make that happen. That's the thing.
And then I look forward to watching and listening to that episode, my friend.
I will. I will. Well, Jan, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on. I think there's so much more we can talk about. Maybe we should do a part two somewhere. I think that would be cool to do.
You know where I
Uh,
live, Amer. It's
yeah.
you say jump, all I ask is how high, so don't worry about it.
We'll get to it. We'll get to it.
Excellent.
Jan, thanks a lot for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Take care.
See you.
Bye.